Greetings everyone. So today we will be starting with a new topic, that is tackling climate change, which is a part of module 5th. So I have divided this into two parts, wherein part 1 includes the introduction to climate change, issues related, conventions which has taken place before the establishment of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and in part 2 I will be explaining the establishment of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and how Kyoto Protocol has came into the existence, how Kyoto Protocol has replaced by Paris Agreement, and what is the position in India regarding the climate change issues. Starting with part 1, tackling of climate change, we all are aware of the fact that climate change involves many contemporary and dynamic problems that we all are going through right now. You might have came across bundle of articles, research paper, e-movements with regard to dealings with the problem arising due to climate change. More specifically, the problem of global warming, which is now a matter of global concern, and it is a wake-up call for all of us. Tackling this phenomena is of utmost importance given the pivotal role that climate plays in the formation of natural ecosystems and the human lives, affecting economies and civilization on which they are based. Earth's climate continues to warm. The intensity and amount of rainfall during storms such as hurricanes is expected to increase. Problems such as drought and heat waves are also expected to become more intense as the climate warms. It has melt ice sheets, glaciers, which is all these problems are accelerated from season to season, and so many other problems are also arising. So throughout the history, climate has continually changed. When it occurs naturally, it is slow process that takes place over 100 and 1000 of years. But when it changed as per the anthropocentric interference, the human influenced climate change, which we are currently dealing with and is occurring at a much faster rate. Having said this, the research has shown that human activities since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution manifested in fossil fuels consumption for more power generation has led to land deforestation, industrialization, urbanization. The expansion of these have contributed to an increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which has led to global warming. So outline goes as: first we will start with the introduction of climate change, then its meaning, controversy with regard to acceptance of human intervention to the climate change, then we will discuss the concern of international community with regard to climate change, and then how IPCC, that is Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, made a difference in dealing with the climate change problems. Basically, climate change is now affecting every country on every continent. It's disrupting national economies and affecting various lives, costing people, communities and countries today, even more in the future as well. So the bulk of emissions derived from our demand for energy. The largest contributor is carbon dioxide, emitted when fossil fuels are burned to meet those demands. There are also other emissions attached to industrial process and agriculture. It took nearly a century of research and data to convince the vast majority of the scientific community that human activity could alter the climate of our entire planet. As a result of unbalancing the weather of Earth, the sustainability of the planet's ecosystem is under threat, as well as the future of humankind and the stability of global economy, as the report and research has been suggested. Very simpler term, climate change is the long-term alteration in Earth's climate and weather patterns. It is a global phenomena of climate transformation characterized by the changes in the usual climate of the planet that are specially caused by human activities. The climate of an area includes seasonal temperature and rainfall averages and wind patterns. Different places have different climates, that we all know. Climate change could refer to a particular location or the planet as a whole. Other types of climate include tropical climates, which are hot and humid, and temperature climates, which have warm summers and cooler winters, etc. Climate changes may cause weather patterns to be less predictable. These unexpected weather patterns can make it difficult to maintain and grow crops in regions that rely on farming because expected temperature and rainfall levels can no longer be relied on and cannot be predicted accurately. So, climate change has long been connected with other damaging weather events such as more frequent and more intense hurricanes, floods, downpours, and winter storms, etc. So, many of us are concerned about this global warming, and each and every day we are trying to make such efforts to overcome the problem of global warming. There are a lot of controversies with regard to climate change, just like any other social and scientific problems. Some argues that anthropocentric interference in the ecosystem is increasing day by day because humans are disturbing the entire nature for their own insatiable needs and desire. While on the other hand, some believes that human beings plays minor role or in some cases no role in the process of natural climate cycle. Some claims suggest that changes observed in Earth's climate since the early 20th century are primarily driven by human activities. These human-produced temperature increases are commonly referred to as a global warming. However, it also agrees that along with human activities, some natural processes also contribute to climate change, including internal variability and external forcing such as volcano activity, changes in the sun's energy output, variation in Earth's orbit, etc. So for many years, oil companies were heavily invested in pushing the idea that fossil fuels did not have any impact on climate change. They casted a doubt on the climate change, referring as climate change as natural phenomena, and even research conclusively showed that fossil fuels are a major contributing cause of climate change, but they have neglected this idea. While consensus among nearly all scientists, scientific organizations and government is that climate change is happening and it is caused by human activity, a small minority of voices questions the validity of such assertion and prefers to cast doubt on the majority of evidence that no human activity does not affect the climate change. And that's how the difference of opinion has led to the idea of climate change deniers. So some scientists have also questioned the human origin of global warming, explaining that CO2 released into the atmosphere by human activities does not really affect the climate nor the ecosystem of Earth. They further argues that these gases are either regulated by ecosystems, that they are not released in sufficient quantities to have an impact, or that other gases have a greater impact on ecosystem. Several other arguments are also invoked. For example, some say climate change is a lie invented by the rival state to brought down the economy of other developed states. It's the condition that we have faced, and some countries have this idea, this notion that climate change is just a hoax and it doesn't have to do anything with the reality. So some have the view that the climate change is a natural process and nature has its own way of governing the entire system. The idea is that climate change is a natural phenomenon, normal and cyclical, and there's no need to worry about it. However, the work of the IPCC and hundreds of newer independent works have proved that this argument is false, and that climate change is indeed a phenomenon of human origin, as the temperature has been rising at abnormal rates since the Industrial Revolution, and that it is dangerous for the world's ecosystem and societies. Earth's climate has constantly been changing even before human came into the picture, before the idea of anthropocentric interference came into the picture. From Ice Age to this age, it took nearly a century of research and data to convince the vast majority of the scientists. Dating back to the ancient Greeks, many people had proposed that human could change temperature and influence rainfall by chopping down trees, plowing fields, or irrigating a desert, etc. And from 80s to 90s, many theories with regard to climate has been observed, and it all has suggested that carbon emission from fossil fuel and burning of fossil fuels industrial revolution drastically increased along with the population, and this all has led the global cause, which is excessive industrialization, is leading to the idea of global warming. In fact, shows that earth did not cool somewhat between 1940 to 1970 due to a post-war boom in aerosol pollutants which reflected sunlight away from the planet. Scientists have started observing the change in the climate, but international community has yet to realize the same. Even if we see the 1972 UN conference, which is held in Stockholm, which we have discussed a lot, so climate change hardly registered on the agenda of Stockholm. So the Stockholm was centered on issues such as chemical pollution, atomic bomb testing, etc., all the other aspects of environment. Then in 1975, US scientist Wallace Broker put the term global warming into the picture, and 1980s would mark a sharp increase in global temperature in all the convention which has came after the 1980s only. Now let's discuss that what role ozone layer plays in climate change. So concerns that the earth ozone layer could be at risk and other anthropogenic substances were also raised in the early 1970s. These ozone depleting substances were mostly introduced in the 1970s in a wide range of industrial and consumer applications, mainly refrigerators, air conditioners, fire extinguishers, etc. So scientists discovered in the 1970s that the ozone layer was being depleted. At the same time, scientists warned that the release of these substances into the atmosphere could deplete the ozone layer, hindering its ability to prevent harmful ultraviolet rays from reaching the earth. This would adversely affect ocean ecosystem, agriculture productivity and animal population, and harm human through higher rates of skin cancer, cataracts and weakened immune system. In response to this growing concern, the issue of ozone depletion was first discussed by the Governing Council of UNEP, that we know as United Nations Environmental Programme, in the year 1976. So UNEP convened a conference in March 1977 that adopted a world plan of action on the ozone layer and established a coordinating committee of the ozone layer to guide future international action on ozone and periodically to assess ozone depletion. So if you guys might have come across the current news that says that ozone layer is slowly healing. Moving ahead with the global warming and climate change. So according to US Geological Survey, global warming is just one aspect of climate change. In fact, they say that global warming refers to the rise in global temperature due to mainly in the increasing concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. On the other hand, climate change refers to the increasing changes in the measures of climate over a long period of time, including precipitation, temperature and wind patterns. Global warming is the long-term heating of Earth's climate system observed since the pre-industrial period between 1850 and 1900 due to human activities, primarily fossil fuel burning, which increases heat trapping greenhouse gas levels in Earth's atmosphere. The term is frequently used interchangeably with the term climate change, though the global warming refers to both human and natural produced warming and the effects it has on our planet. It is most commonly measured as the average increase in Earth's global surface temperature. The cause of current climate change is largely human activity, like natural gases, oil, coal, the burning of these things, and the materials release what are called greenhouse gases into Earth's atmosphere. There, these gases trap heat from the sun rays inside the atmosphere, causing Earth's average temperature to rise. This rise in the planet's temperature is called global warming. The warming of the planet impacts local and regional climates, and since 1970s we are dealing with global warming problem. So through the 1970s and the 1980s, the international community became increasingly concerned that ozone depletion substances would harm the ozone layer. So in 1981, UNEP, as United Nations Environmental Programme, acted on a proposal to develop a global convention on the ozone layer. The draft convention was first presented to the international community the same year. A lack of understanding about the true extent of the environmental risk from the ozone depletion made early negotiations very difficult, since we didn't have that much of scientific advancement at that period of time. So there were also questions about the validity of the science and doubts about the technology to respond to the challenge. Perseverance, however, resulted in the 1985 Vienna Convention on the Protection of Ozone Layer, a multilateral environmental agreement. So in 1981, as already discussed, the UNEP acted on a proposal to develop a global convention on the ozone layer. The draft convention was first presented to the international community. Vienna Convention is a framework treaty for controls development that also facilitated cooperation on research. This called for international monitoring and scientific assessment. However, it does not include legally bounding reduction goals, so countries could not agree on specific control measures. Also, it has not provided that which gases cause the danger to the ozone layer. So these all problems were tried to overcome by the accompanying protocol, that was Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer. To fill the gap of Vienna Convention, after 2 years, Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer was introduced in the year 1987, which was entered into force in 1989. So it was an effort to apply limits to the production and consumption of main chemicals that were causing the destruction of the Earth's protective ozone layer. So Montreal Protocol agreed restricting chemicals that damage the ozone layer. Although not established with climate change in mind at that point of time, so it has had a greater impact on greenhouse gas emission. It is believed that the implementation of the Montreal Protocol provisions, the ozone layer should return to its pre-state before 1980 levels by the year 2050 and 2075. So as per the current news, it's healing, so we are kind of picking up. So the protocol has become one of the prime global contributors to the fight against climate change, as most of the ozone depleting substances it has phased out are also powerful greenhouse gases. So a multilateral fund established by an amendment to the protocol has approved activities including industrial conversion, technical assistance, training and capacity building since adoption of Montreal Protocol. The parties also adopted several other amendments to the protocol, which was London Amendment 1990, Copenhagen Amendment 1992, the Montreal Amendment 1997, the Beijing Amendment 1999, and the latest is Kigali Amendment in the year 2016. As global warming gained attention as a real phenomena, researchers dug into possible consequences of a warming climate. Among the predictions were warning of severe heat waves, droughts, and more powerful hurricanes fueled by rising sea surface temperatures. So in the year 1988, an intergovernmental panel on climate change, also known as IPCC, formed to collate and assess evidence on climate change. So IPCC was established in 1988 to provide policymakers with regular scientific assessment on the current state of knowledge about climate change, and in the year 1989 it was formally established its political and economical impacts and the structure in the 3 working groups. So how it was working: the first group studies changes in the climate as a phenomena. They focus on the process and its magnitude. So the second group is specialized in the consequences of climate change. So they are interested in the vulnerability of ecosystem and societies, as well as how the planet reacts and adapts to climate change. The third group and the last group is responsible for studying the ways of fighting against climate change. The IPCC submitted its first report in the year 1990, and since then they kept making new ones periodically. So in the year 1990, 45th session of the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution that established the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee for a framework convention on climate change, which we known as INC-FCC. Indeed, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has described anthropocentric climate change as inevitable in view of the numerous changes observed in the temperature of the atmosphere, oceans and sea ice, in addition to some extensive changes in the climate cycle over the course of 20th century. So, supported by United Nations Environmental Programme and World Meteorological Organization, mandate Intergovernmental Negotiation Committee to establish framework convention on climate change. So, INC held 5 sessions between 1991 till May 1992. During these meetings, participants from over 150 states discussed the difficult and contentious issues of binding commitments, targets and timetables for the reduction of carbon dioxide emissions, financial mechanism, technological transfer and common but differentiated responsibilities of developed and developing countries were also discussed. So the same thing as we have adopted in the Principle 7 of Rio 1992, as states shall cooperate in a spirit of global partnership to conserve, protect and restore the health and integrity of the Earth's ecosystem in view of the different contributors to global environmental degradation. States have common but differentiated responsibilities. The developed countries acknowledge the responsibility that they bear in the international pursuit of sustainable development in view of the pressure their society places on the global environment and of technologies and financial resources they command. So CBRD, the principle, was formally adopted in United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in the year 1992. This we have already discussed in brief. So that was the first international instrument to address climate change and the most comprehensive international attempt to address negative impacts to global environment.
In Climate Watch, a new United Nations report warns the impacts of climate change are increasing and inevitable. More than 100 scientists from across the globe put together the findings, which is the most extensive look to date at the effects of climate change on the environment. CBS News' Gwen Baumgartner has the details.
From the Earth's tallest peaks to the ocean floor, scientists warn no part of the world will be spared from the climate crisis.
The consequences for nature and humanity are sweeping and severe.
The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released the unprecedented report, concluding that the planet can't keep up with global warming. The oceans, which act as a sponge for CO2 emissions, are at capacity, threatening to swallow up islands and coastal cities.
We need to take immediate and drastic action to cut emissions right now.
Scientists say climate change consequences are already happening, like melting ice in Antarctica and Greenland. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The report says failure to act soon will lead to a steady stream of catastrophes.
What is at stake is the health of ecosystems, wildlife, and importantly, the world we leave for our children.
One worst-case prediction sees 1 billion people affected by the year 2050. Drought and famine are forecasted, along with more frequent and destructive storms.
Imagine you have a story that your grandfather told you about, the town flooding, but it was back 80 years ago. Well, imagine that happening every year.
Scientists say the world is in a race against time to combat climate change, but hope the new findings will lead to action. Gwen Baumgartner, CBS News, London.
CBS News climate and weather contributor Jeff Baradelli joins me now. Jeff, what stood out to you in this report?
So I've read a bunch of these IPCC reports. They are dense, they're technical, they're sometimes difficult to read, and they're normally very conservative. They are not very assertive typically. They want to dot all their I's, cross all their T's before they make any assertions in the reports. This one's a lot more bold. It's a lot more assertive as they become more confident in the science. And so they're using words like unprecedented, irreversible, things that they might have left out a few years ago for diplomatic reasons are not left out this year. it's starting to get to the point where, the reports are catching up with the science, which is, oftentimes the science will establish something, the IPCC will be slow to adopt it, not slow to adopt it this time around. They are very assertive in saying that humans are causing irreversible changes to this Earth.
What do the scientists mean when they say the Earth's oceans have absorbed the rising temperatures we've seen?
Right, so greenhouse gases trap heat in, and the more carbon dioxide, the more methane we release through the burning of fossil fuels, the more heat that's trapped in. Some of it gets absorbed by land, but 93% of it gets absorbed by the ocean. Why that's important is the ocean is huge, it's tremendous, and it controls the climate all over the Earth, and it comes back to haunt us. If you're absorbing all that heat, and take a look at that. Every single year, ocean heat content hits new records. And actually, the amount of ocean heat content that we have absorbed in the past 50 years, we're going to see 5 to 7 times that likely by the end of the century. And what does it do? It powers much stronger hurricanes. It causes heavier rains, more extreme weather, and also kills a lot of creatures in the sea. Coral reefs are in danger of being almost completely wiped out by the middle or late part of the century. Kelp forests are going to suffer, and they actually store a lot of carbon dioxide. We need kelp forests. Grass, ocean grass, that's also disappearing. Wetlands, 50% of them, we lost about that much over the past several decades. The point is, there are cascading impacts. You cannot kill coral and not expect it to reverberate through the food web. 25% of the ocean creatures at one point in their life depend upon the coral reefs. If the coral reefs are gone, where do they go? And then what happens to us as a consequence and the rest of the species as a consequence? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
This all sounds very frightening, truthfully. The report also discusses a relatively new phenomenon of marine heat waves in the oceans.
Yeah.
Could you explain that to us?
Right, so, marine heat waves have likely always occurred, but they've occurred naturally. 90% of the marine heat waves over the past couple of decades are now attributable to humans, attributable to human-caused climate change. So that's a tremendous amount. And they're expecting that by the end of the century, we could see them increase by 25-fold, so a 25 times increase in the amount of marine heat waves are possible by the end of the century, especially in a high emissions scenario. When I say a high emissions scenario, I mean business as usual. We keep burning lots of fossil fuels. And so the bottom line is most of the heat waves in the ocean are being caused by us now, and we're going to see them increase by 25 times. So basically all the coral is going to die if we don't do something to reel in all the fossil fuels that we're burning and all the greenhouse gases that we're releasing into the atmosphere.
You've touched on this, but what are some of the projected changes and risks? And I was asking you just before we were on camera here, what does it mean for people on the coastlines here?
So we're likely to see, they quantify the increase in sea level to be somewhere between 2.5 and 3 feet likely by the end of the century. NOAA has said it could be as high as 6 feet, and a lot of that depends upon if we see large chunks of Greenland fall into the sea. Those are things that we cannot predict, but judging by the amount of warming without any large chunks of Greenland or large chunks of Antarctica falling into the sea, 3 feet of sea level rise, that will affect about 1 billion people, if not more, because most folks live in cities, and most folks live right by the coastline. So low-lying cities, especially Pacific Islands, will actually probably disappear. Those people will have to be relocated, and a lot of people who live in low-lying areas in Asia and Africa and even here in the United States will have to migrate and move to other areas. In the Arctic, we've lost 50% of the Arctic ice in the last 50 years, or actually 40 years. 50% in the last 40 years. It's a tremendous loss. It is likely, and first of all, it's unprecedented, at least in the last 1,000 years. That's what it says in this IPCC report. Likely many tens of thousands of years. Actually, I should say at least since the last ice age. So the last 1,000 years or so, we've seen unprecedented levels of sea ice in the Arctic. So there's just a lot of cascade effects too. And by the way, one more thing that they mentioned that I hadn't seen them mention before, but it has been in the science for a couple of years, that when you really warm the Arctic and you demolish sea ice because of the warmer air, it causes the jet stream to do really funky things. And so we often will talk about it here in the United States during the winter, where this wavy jet stream is causing the jet stream to maybe be more wavy. Well, this report actually talks about the fact that it's causing perturbations or changes in the jet streams and changes in the storm tracks, and that has effects right here in the United States.
Jeff, thank you for breaking it all down for us in a way that we can understand.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So guys, with this we have completed first part of our topic, that is tackling climate change. Now in the second part we will be discussing UNFCCC and its extensions. So I'm leaving you with this video clip. Do watch it, and again if you have any query, doubt, concern, kindly email that to me at ainansari@mpdnlu.ac.in. Stay safe, stay